Hello BookTube, I'm Jonathan, and half of you are going to love this series, and half of you are going to hate it. So I'm going to give you a spoiler-free breakdown of these, quite frankly, insane books, and do my best to answer the question, should you read The Quantum Thief by Hannu Rajaniemi? The Quantum Thief is the first book in the Jean le Flambeur trilogy, followed by The Fractal Prince and The Causal Angel. It's a tight trilogy with each book being only around 300 pages long, and it's not exactly easy to put it into an exact subgenre of science fiction, but I would describe it as post-singularity cyberpunk with elements of both hard sci-fi and sci-fantasy. So what exactly is the premise for The Quantum Thief? Jean le Flambeur gets up in the morning and has to kill his alternate self before his alternate self can kill him first. Meanwhile, investigator Isidore Beautrelet, called in to investigate the murder of a chocolatier, finds himself on the trail of an arch-criminal, a man named Jean le Flambeur. The first thing I have to talk about is the language. The world building in this series is immense. The technology, society, philosophy, history are all incredibly detailed, and that creates for an immersive reading experience. However, this does come with a lot of words that you're not initially going to know the meaning of, also known as technobabble. I would put this on the higher end of the technobabble scale. I would say that Accelerando by Charles Stross and The Quantum Thief by Hannu Rajaniemi probably claim the top 2 spots for books with the most words that I didn't understand. Is this a bad thing? While I can certainly understand the frustration of someone reading The Quantum Thief and getting 50 pages in and still feeling completely lost, here's why it actually worked for me. An expression of mine to describe certain books is, the sentences make sense, but the pages don't. What this means is that I can literally understand what is going on, but I'm struggling to find the connections between events, the characters' motivations, the objective of the story, or the purpose of the themes. And typically, this is not a type of reading experience that I tend to enjoy. I would describe The Quantum Thief as the complete opposite. The sentences don't make sense, but the pages do. And what I mean by this is that while I might not understand every word or how every piece of technology works, I am following the story. The book uses a relatively simple structure as we follow 2 main storylines. There are some interludes as well, but front and center, we have a heist story and we have a detective story, and that's the anchor in the storm. Despite all of the brain-breaking world building and sci-fi concepts, there's a fun adventure at the heart of it. It's kind of like listening to experimental music. There's all these crazy sounds that are hard to make sense of. But then you find that one hook, and that one hook helps you find a groove, and the more you listen, the more the rest of the song starts to fall into place. A thief pulling off a heist, a detective solving a case. Those are the hooks that pull us through The Quantum Thief. And the more you read, the more terms you begin to understand, and the puzzle pieces start to come together. So, what about the science? Is this a book for hard sci-fi fans only? Well, Hannu Rajaniemi does have a PhD in mathematical physics, and that comes through in the book. Authors that Rajaniemi reminded me of included Alastair Reynolds, Charles Stross, Stephen Baxter, and Neil Stephenson. If you enjoy maths and physics, I think there's going to be a lot for you to like in this book, as elements of game theory and quantum physics are prominent in the story. If you're not so interested in hard science, will this book still work for you? Maybe, and here's why. I used to think of science fiction as a spectrum from soft sci-fi to hard sci-fi. But The Quantum Thief rearranged the rules of this spectrum and turned it into a circle. As you can see, if the science becomes so hard, so advanced, so theoretical, it almost turns into magic. The great Arthur C. Clarke quote goes, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." And Rajaniemi pushes the limits of human imagination to depict this advanced technology that, yes, I think will be primarily enjoyed by fans of hard science fiction, but could also be enjoyed by fans of fantasy that will like the technological abilities that can turn some characters into something akin to wizards or gods. So next, I wanted to talk about the characters and themes. I think this book is more so driven by the plot and the concepts, but I did find there to be an enjoyable cast of characters. They play on certain tropes, and I found there to be a reasonable amount of depth to them. I found myself invested in certain relationships and rooting for particular characters. The dialogue had personality, and the deeper we got into the story, the more layered their motivations became. And I know that a lot of hard sci-fi can come across as quite cold, but I feel like Rajaniemi is a writer that actually has something to say. The way that these characters were affected by things like love and death and technology was something that I emotionally resonated with. And yes, the book is packed with crazy terminology, but in the quieter, more reflective moments, I found the writing to be quite poetic as well. It's also surprisingly funny, as this isn't a comedic book, but every few chapters there would be something offbeat that would just catch me off guard and break the tension with a laugh before we dive back into the insanity. Overall, I found this to be an incredibly rewarding reading experience. Yes, I did have to reread certain paragraphs at times, but I never minded because I was just having so much fun. The way Rajaniemi weaved together storylines, interludes, and concepts was something that I found to be truly ambitious in scope and masterful in execution. I gave The Quantum Thief a 9.5 out of 10. So what about the sequels? Well, to start, I think that The Quantum Thief does reach a satisfying narrative conclusion. It doesn't just feel like part one of a 3-part story, it does have a complete story arc, so don't feel like you need to commit to reading the entire trilogy. However, if you do enjoy The Quantum Thief, I recommend continuing, and I'm gonna guess it's best to do so without taking too long of a break, just so all of the elaborate terminology and history stays relatively fresh in your mind. So what are you getting into with The Fractal Prince? Well, half of the book, to me, felt like a continuation of The Quantum Thief, and the other half felt pretty new. It does have a storyline that is Middle Eastern inspired, and it follows a politically and culturally driven narrative. What I wanted from the sequel was for it to go deeper on the elements that it introduced in the first book. And it does that to an extent, but I think more so it goes wider and introduces even more new elements. This might appeal to some readers, but personally, I felt like it was really stretching my capability to both understand and be invested in all that was happening within this expanded world. In the first half, I did feel a little bit lost, but things did start to come together in the back half. The second book is also a little bit more serious in tone. There's still the occasionally amusing dialogue, but I didn't laugh out loud like I did a handful of times while reading the first book. The Fractal Prince is just as ambitious and creative as The Quantum Thief, if not more so. It also builds to some really intense moments, and there's a clever twist hidden in there as well. And something else I enjoyed was the examination of stories themselves, and their place and value within different societies. But I think overall, it lost just a little bit of the sense of fun and adventure that I connected with in The Quantum Thief. In the end, I gave The Fractal Prince an 8 out of 10. So does the series stick the landing with the Causal Angel? To me, the Causal Angel was an amalgamation of the first 2 books. It incorporated some of the expanded ideas and world building from the Fractal Prince, while also returning to some of the narrative threads and concepts from the Quantum Thief. It also introduced some new elements that were video game inspired, and it introduces a new character that I found to be the most visually distinct and to also have one of the largest personalities in the series, and I enjoyed them a lot. I think this one felt a little bit uneven in terms of the pacing, but it really went for it in terms of the stories, the ideas, and the action. I think this book really brought everything together in a way that I'm not sure I understood everything or much at all, to be honest, but in an emotionally satisfying way. I'm not much of a rereader, but I'm pretty sure I'll be compelled to reread this series in the future. Overall, I think this book was a little grander in scope than the first book, but I'm going to give The Quantum Thief the edge for really nailing both the setting and the structure. I gave The Causal Angel a 9 out of 10. So there you go, I thoroughly enjoyed this series. It's not perfect, but it is a unique and memorable reading experience. One that I'm going to put in my top 5 sci-fi series. I know it's a polarizing one, so hopefully this video has given you a better idea of whether this series might be right for you. Let me know your thoughts on it in the comments. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, smash or just gently click the subscribe button. And if you really enjoyed it, consider becoming a Patreon member, where you can become one of my robots, androids, or cyborgs like Nima and New Eden, and you can find more sci-fi content over here.